How's everyone going? How's it going? How's it going? How's it going? How's it going? You good? How's it going? How's it going? Everybody doing all right? You feeling good? I'm Jonathan Landrum once again. Work for the Associated Press, entertainment writer, producer. I want to go down and introduce our immaculate panelists. I want to go one by one. I want to start with Odessa. Just give your name and then also what you do for your position and also for your company as well.
Cool. Hi everyone, my name is Odessa Jenkins. Everyone calls me OJ. I'm the president of Emtrain. We're an e-learning and analytics company that really has a mission to help people work better together in the workplace through fostering inclusion, ethics, and compliance and respect. I'm really excited to be here, and I want to be interviewed by Jonathan at some point in my life.
We can make that happen, by the way.
That thing.
Hi everyone, good afternoon, great to be here. My name's Debs Kuness. I'm a senior business psychologist specialised in employee experience and employee listening particularly. I've had the pleasure of working for Workday for the last year and a half, specialised in our employee listening platform, and I'm based in London.
Hi everyone, my name is Stacie. I work at Nielsen. Nielsen is often known for our media and entertainment research. I sit in our DE&I pillar, but I focus on thought leadership around representation and content and how that impacts how we are perceived in our places of work.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm Mason Williams. I'm the global head of DEI at Mattel. So playing with toys is what I do for a living, and hoping that up here with some great folks and share our thoughts, and hope we have some great conversations afterwards as well. So thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Darren Chiappetta. I'm actually transitioning out of my role as the global head of employee relations and policy at Sony Pictures. I will miss dealing with actors and their bad behavior, but I'm moving on to another role with a tech and media company as the global head of employee relations and HR compliance. So my take on inclusivity and diversity deals with people that step off the path from it sometimes, but how we can get ahead of it and make sure they don't step off the path. So glad to be here today.
Great. Now, I want to ask the entire panel and just kind of give a brief example of how you've seen inclusion at your organization. Let me start with Odessa.
Yeah, I think we're lucky enough, and I'm going to say lucky, to be founder-led, women-led, and women-founded. Shout out to all the women in the room. So I think representation matters, and so inclusion has been modeled in this organization since its birth. So we didn't really have to try. I think being founded by a woman and led by women automatically places that feeling and those understandings of what it means to be disadvantaged. I think, though, one example of the way that we show up with inclusion is implementing a 4-day work week, and how we've really stood up to say we want our employees to look forward to coming to work on Monday and not getting off on Friday, and what that's done for our parents and for our moms and for everyone who can show up better for us on Monday. So I think that's one of the best ways we've shown up.
Great.
That just gave me the chills.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
This is going to be very inspiring, by the way. So you're going to get some true nuggets out of this, by the way.
I think for me a great example is the fact that, at Workday, listening is an integral part of our culture, and that drives a real sense of belonging and real care and value in every single employee, every single day. We're lucky that we have a very mature listening culture, so every single week we share our views on different things, and the great thing about the way that we do that is that our leaders can respond to those in the moment, so I feel heard all the time, and that's a big part of why I feel a great sense of belonging to the organisation.
It's amazing.
At Nielsen, one way that, when I think about inclusion, and one of the things that we do that perhaps is a little bit different, because we all have DE&I functions, we're all focusing on development, on diverse talents, acquisition, recruiting, retention, everyone, has those things, and there are best practices within that. But one of the things that we do that I think is really important is we take those same DE&I principles and we ensure that we activate them within sort of our product and services. So as an example, which might seem a little bit foreign to some folks here that, I work in media and entertainment, but this is an example that would still, make sense in any organization, is when we think about, for example, inclusion in content, right? The content we all watch on television, our kids watch on their phones, we watch on our phones. one of the things we wanted to do was operationalize the visibility of inclusion, of diverse people within content, without having to manually watch shows and like count people. So the idea was, you know, if we really want to speak to these DE&I values, but we want to bring them through in the products and services that we serve to the industry, not just all the internal work, but do the external work as well, right? Beyond community, advocacy and things like that. Could we really build those principles into our work streams? And I'll probably talk a little bit more about the entertainment and media part as we move on, and I'll segue and make it make sense for the audience. But this idea of taking DE&I and operationalizing it within what we serve to our clients means that major brands, right, P&G, Kellogg, Coke, whomever, can evaluate where they're placing their media investment through this new DE&I lens, right? So they're not just saying, well, I'm gonna make sure I'm within, you know, CBS News, or I'm gonna make sure I'm within whatever this show is, but they're actually looking at that show outside of audience ratings, and they're saying, let me look at the inclusive attributes of a show before I invest my brand to be inside of that show. Does that show reflect my brand's values? And so while that's a little bit outside of what some folks do, the idea that I want to bring when I speak to inclusion is taking DE&I principles and pushing them through into the work product, which is really sort of the next level outside of talent development and retention.
Well, I'd say that inclusion and representation are at the heart of what we do. Our job is to think about inspiring the wonder of childhood for everyone. And everyone deserves and needs to be able to see themselves in the experiences they play with, the content they consume, even the way that we think about designing needs to be thought about it from every bit different angle possible. So what does that mean? You have to have teams that look like the world. You have to have teams that function in the way that we want to see the world be. And when you can get the payoff when you actually see people playing with toys. And that, you know, the idea of a toy is, you know, that's the focus of what we want to create. We want to create experiences that can help build people up, build our society. And, you know, it starts with play. You learn more from play than you do from an hour of talking to people, right? Mm-hmm. So you play with a person for 5 minutes, you know them better than you would if you talked to them for 30. So that's kind of our way.
I'm going to build off a little bit of what Stacie said, because when we talk about diverse and inclusive content, studios are the factories that build content, right? There's stories and you get into a sound stage, and it's basically like a factory where your output is inclusive content. So the industry has not always been the easiest place to break into. I think everyone probably knows that. And part of just making sure that the stories are more varied and inclusive is also telling stories by people who represent exactly what that story is. So if you're telling a story about somebody that might be transgender, traditionally Hollywood would just bring a regular writer's room together and tell the story based on what they think that they know. Versus what's going on now is really making sure that there is an inclusive voice, that there's a diverse team of writers, that even down to the crew, down to your camera person, your hair and makeup, down to your extras, that these folks who haven't traditionally had an opportunity to break into the industry have a pathway, which is really great. You know, it's important also to partner with organizations, right? You know, if we've got something that might be a sensitive topic, we're going to seek out the expert in that field and say, help us understand, because what you don't want to do is think that you're being very inclusive and pat yourself on the back, but you're actually being offensive, right? So at the end of the day, it's important, you know, that we work with folks like Stacie to make sure that the content is enjoyable, is true representations authentically of what these stories are, but you want to do it the right way.
And can I add just one point to that, which I think is a perfect segue, is how do we then, in this case, measure the relationship between all the things you talked about, right? Bringing all the right people behind the camera, and we're not going to get into media too much, I promise folks, but how do we measure the relationship between, let's say, the things that we're doing, right? In this case, it's all the folks behind the camera and through, you know, folks that typically aren't maybe, you know, the top three. They're not showrunners, they're not, you know, executive producers or whatever. The relationship between those activities and the end result ROI, bingeability, watchability, consumption, ratings. Like, how do we measure that this inclusion actually did yield us more watchability of content? That's the work that I focus on. So these are sort of the way we've taken the DE&I principles and pushed them into our output in our work stream.
That's amazing.
Sorry, well, I won't talk too much about media, but it's so fun, right? We all watch.
Media is awesome.
We're all watching stuff.
No, this is...
And it's a big part of how we're perceived, and in some cases, why people of color, you know, are often aren't paid the same, have less opportunity, aren't seen. Part of that is how we're presented within content, or the invisibility within content. So
No, this is all great stuff. I'm learning even
just
myself.
let me know if you want me to turn it, dial it down.
No, this is fine. I'm sure everyone here is learning and taking everything in. So no, this, like I said before, you're gonna get a bunch of nuggets. Who's willing to take them all? I am. Why not? Darren.
Yes.
In many organizations, the sensibility around inclusion differs among age groups, as well as in different levels in hierarchy. Could you tell us if you sense that in your company and what it looks like in practice?
Yeah, we were just actually all talking in the green room too about how the pandemic has kind of changed a lot of things, and how it's kind of changed the way we live and the way we gather with our families and things like that. And I think it's important when you look at inclusivity to look at not just the demographics that kind of come to mind, but also the way people want to work, how they want to work, where they want to work. And I think what's really interesting is the emerging workforce has expectations that I think some of senior leaders might not share, right? And so in my opinion, from what I've seen, is the emerging workforce actually doesn't just expect, they demand flexibility. They also demand respect. So imagine my role on Hollywood sets, people demanding respect. It's kind of a fun gig, right? To make that go down. But I think it's a really interesting scenario of people that, really want to work that they want to work. There's in my former life, I worked at Netflix, and one of the values of Netflix is freedom and responsibility, and that's what the emerging workforce wants. What I've seen is that leaders in the organization that are a little newer to their career, or possibly kind of lower or middle management, are gung-ho for allowing people to have the flexibility that they want, people to work the way they want to work, because they'll do their best work. As you get higher up the hierarchy, and listen, and I'm sure Stacie can tell you, Hollywood is a little bit more traditional sometimes than you would think. As it gets up the hierarchy, there's a misunderstanding of why do people not want to come back to work? Why do people want to work from home? And you miss an opportunity to be inclusive of how people like to work and work well, right? So that's one example. The other example I can share, kind of this multi-generational groups that are kind of coming together now, and I don't want to say they're clashing, that's not the right word, right? But I think we're all seeking to understand each other. And I know I kind of mentioned transgender earlier, but there's a really interesting scenario of emerging workers are a lot more supportive and aware and curious about people's gender expression, gender identity, transgender. Whereas folks that may be a little bit more up the ladder, or maybe folks that have been in the workforce a little bit longer, are confused. That's probably the best word I could put, right? Not as supportive, not as understanding. I get a million times the question of, why is it my role to give somebody a pronoun of something that they look different, that they present as? And that's a really tough question to answer, but it's a great opportunity to educate. So I have seen that. I have seen kind of, and I hate to kind of make it generational, but I have seen values change. I've seen kind of attitudes, I've seen patience, just a little bit different. And so at the end of the day, I never want to generalize, but for the most part, I think there's a bit of a dichotomy sometimes.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Odessa?
I think, well, first of all, my pronouns are she and her. And I think that you're absolutely right with the idea of flexibility, but there's also just the discomfort of telling truth to power, and how this new emerging group of workers are enabled with data and information in a way that others are not. Right? What we're trying to do with data at Emtrain and content, so we can actually talk content and not be in Hollywood, friends. But I think what we're seeking to do is to use the information that all of these emerging workers already have access to and an understanding of, because they are data literate. They're born data literate. They know how to understand, interpret, and use data and technologies in ways that others would never understand. So I think it's more than just those who are at the top and may not have a connection with this emerging work group not understanding or being dismissive to it. It's a lack of information that they have access to, and I think that's where technology really allows us to tell a story where in other ways you couldn't. You can tell the truth to power with data and information, because there's one thing that folks understand at the top is information and data. How did we get here, and what are we going to do to get ourselves out of it? And I think that's one of the opportunities that this group can teach us.
And as the younger generations have more access to information and data, they're holding accountable older generations. And I think that's what you're talking about when you're saying, like, you know, maybe discomfort or not understanding. And I feel like even with my own kids, I have a college-aged kid and a high school kid, there is a lot of, they're sharing data with me at their age, understanding how to interpret data and what it means, building connections and relationships between the data, and holding me and others accountable as a result of their data collection. And so I think that's what's new for the perhaps, you know, older generation. I guess I'm part of that group now, but is that we aren't the only ones that are holding the access codes anymore to the data. Everyone has it.
Well, and measuring outcomes, like this generation of likes and counting things and looking at engagement and trying to not just understand when you look at something how many people like it. That is in their natural understanding of what success means. So you can't go tell them that this is success and hide the data from them anymore. Like it's not happening. 100%. You have to show up with the desired outcome. How did we measure it? And if we missed, how are we going to get there? And I think that's what excites me about this emerging group of workers.
Yeah, I think the accountability, to your point, the expectations are different on that as well, right? And the one quick thing I'll say about kind of my role is, you know, it's to educate, not to punish. And sometimes people just, you know, maybe you've seen it, people misbehave at work, I don't know. I've seen it a couple times. And the emerging workforce is not forgiving. They've seen cancel culture, they've grown up with cancel culture. And if I go back and say we took appropriate action, that's not enough, right? And so to your point is the prove it to me, show me, the accountability expectations are very different. And it's going to change the way we do things in the future without a doubt.
Yeah. Deborah, this is a question for Deborah and for Mason as well. A lot of what makes people feel included is having their voices heard, right? How can that be enhanced in your organization, or both of your organizations? And can technology help as well?
Yes, in short. I think, you know, one of the things that's quite interesting when it comes to employee listening is that a lot of leaders will push back on more continuous listening, particularly, you know, given the pace of change that we're seeing, which, you know, makes a lot more sense. And we'll say, you know, what about survey fatigue? Too many surveys, we're asking our people too many things, asking their opinions about too many things. Can we just crack on and get on with things? In reality, you know, survey fatigue isn't really the pervasive problem that I see in organizations. It's more a lack of action fatigue. So it's not about we're asking too many questions, it's that we're not acting on the data that comes back, to your point earlier. So I think, you know, one of the questions that I would ask everybody to ask themselves, thinking about any HR tech that you use, whether it be a listening platform or something else, is how is this technology aligning with our values as an organization? How is it helping us to drive our people agenda? How is it helping us to drive more inclusive culture in our organizations? And there are countless examples of how, you know, many platforms enable a business to do that. So whether it be listening on a more continuous basis, whether it be making sure that actions come from the bottom up as opposed to top down, and that being built into our programs from day one. That's very different to how things were done 10 years ago, and that's the way that the most innovative platforms are now operating. It's about evoking and supporting a culture change, not just asking questions.
Well, and I would say that if you embed your DEI principles into your core business strategy, then it makes a lot of sense. And the strategy doesn't have to be very complex of an equation, right? If you have a diverse workforce, right, so you have the right count of people, and you make those people feel included, right? So they value those people. You make them feel as if they can count. What do? You get better products, better innovation. You attract better talent. You retain your talent. And you have your aligned focus on who the consumer is and what the consumer wants. And they're the real boss, right? Somebody who, you know what works and what doesn't work through your output, and your business improves when you use DEI as a strategy. And so going back to some of the things that technology, yes, we get empirical data on the regular about, is this strategy really working? And it is. And then it becomes the conversation becomes not about changing minds around DEI, and this is why you should believe in inclusivity and whatnot. No, you want to do better business, value your people, get the right folks in the room, and then have everything aligned on who we're making this for. We're making it for our consumers.
One question. I know, of course, you're at Mattel.
Yeah.
When it comes to DEI and using technology, is there an example where you've seen kind of everything come full circle when it comes to incorporating the technology that you've kind of seen firsthand?
Well, so I'll give you an example, and even just like in product development. Let's take it through. Like, so imagine like shared spaces through VR, right? You can design now. You have teams. Our teams in China, our engineers in China are now working with our engineers here, and they're in virtual rooms together, manipulating the same 3D CAD file. Right? If you think about it, yeah, well, so we're playing with different toys and we're playing in a virtual space, but that's super equitable. Because now it's not the US engineers passing it over to Asia to now make this manufacture. No, we're in the same room at the same time. And then what does that do? Now that really breaks down that former hierarchy of like cultural hierarchy. And it says like, no, we're all in the same place at the same time, and we're gonna get the best out of you and best out of you. And you know what, if we're gonna have a talk, we're not gonna schedule another meeting in it. Let's talk where we are. And so I think that makes things more efficient. It makes things, your product gets better, and then your teams start to get to know each other even better.
Absolutely. No, that's a great answer. No, that's great. Darren, more and more companies use data to measure not just diversity, but also the qualitative measures like inclusion. Do leaders generally respect that data, or have some, or are there some skepticism about it sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, we had a great conversation about data, right? And how important it is, and metrics are very important to everything that we do. In my experience, what I've seen recently is it depends, you know? Obviously, you know, if it's a reputable source and there's not a questionable way in which the data was gathered, that should be pretty straightforward. However, I think it's open to interpretation, and I think it's depending on how you want to interpret the data, right? So that's part of it. And I think, to be honest with you, it's also open to our own biases, right? I mean, there's been part of my role as being responsible for policy is building a, you know, post-pandemic, what does flexible work look like? That's no easy task, right? I mean, you have to kind of figure out what the people want. And when the people want this, but your upper leaders are going, yeah, I don't really believe that. I don't think they're really answering truthfully. That's really tough sometimes to have that conversation, where you may have a disconnected leader because of their own biases and very strong opinions about how they feel about something, is either ignoring, dismissing, looking at different context of the data, and it's a difficult conversation to have. It's a great discussion to have because it kind of creates you know, a great discourse that ultimately winds up with probably a wonderful, great policy. But to be quite honest with you, I have seen some leaders dismiss data in favor of, oh, I chatted with XYZ down the street, who's like, you know, a competitor company. That's not how they feel. That's not what they're doing. So it's a little bit of a wave off sometimes. I think depending on how strongly they feel about it, and you know what their biases are.
How do you convince, I guess, at this point, for those who kind of just dismiss it? How do you win over those who are in those positions to show them that it actually does work?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I could say is, you know, and I hate to say this, but you share turnover data, right? If you've got a lot of employee turnover and it's tied to a certain reason with your exit interviews, that helps to move the needle a little bit, right? But listen, all of us know the situation. You can only push so far before you have to take a step back and then kind of reassess your approach and then gently try a different way. So it takes a little bit of massaging.
Yeah.
You align it to business outcomes. And you connect it to the things that they already understand. You align it to their biases. So that was like, I'm not going to be as soft with my answers. So the truth is that majority of leaders don't have a great understanding of what's happening deep down in their organizations. And in a lot of ways, they shouldn't. They are trusting that frozen middle of leadership to really express that in very matrix organizations. So if there isn't good technology, if there isn't good coaching and leadership, then that information isn't trusted in the first place. You look at these D&I and belonging, job descriptions, and it's like freeze the ocean, and then unfreeze it, and then bring me a cup of the water, and then shower us with. It's like ridiculous.
And there's no resources and no
it's
budget.
like, and do it with -6 people and $7.32.
That's
Right.
That's so true.
Like keeping it real.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so I think like the best way to sort of convince is to really align this too. Be fair to your board of directors, be fair to your C-suite, and when you go out, set the expectation of what you're actually going out to do. Like I think we have to step up as practitioners and say, no, I cannot go fix your black woman problem. No, I cannot go fix your LGBTQ problem. I can develop coaches and leaders in this organization so that we're inclusive and we can tell the truth to power, and we can actually talk about equity, which means maybe you don't get 6 nuggets, maybe I get 6 and you get 3, but that's actually what you need, and 6 is what I need, and that's okay today. I think like the paradigm is broken, and until we're ready to tell the truth and put technology with it that helps us tell the truth, we're just going to keep.
Well, even to build on that is that if you have an organization and leadership is not committed to the actual ideas of using DEI and these as tools to be better businessmen, better business people, you're not going to succeed as a business. And so that's where you have to hold leadership accountable. So the idea that like somebody that they're in the ivory tower can still go and wave some kind of magic flag and say like, no, that data doesn't exist, or that, no, and then you show them the bottom line, you look at your stock price and it's tanking, it's your fault because you had the tools in your belt and you refused to pull them out. And so I think that we have to think about it now, like Odessa says, there's an accountability. And I think that we're in an age now where we can hold leadership accountable. And it goes back to even the generational piece. Hey, people want to have answered questions, so they're not going to wait. Like early in our careers, maybe you'd be like, I should ask the boss a question. Next thing you know, it's been 3 years before you even try to talk to him.
But that's a symptom,
you know what I'm saying?
right?
So like that's a symptom of executive.
Like, I care about it as a CEO. I care about it as a president, sure. But who did I hire? And what do they care about?
Yep.
Because those are the folks going to get it done. I'm up here at the press conferences and I'm writing,
And then there's legacy transparency issues too. You were taught that even though everyone wants to change, there are all these legacy issues. So when you said specifically, and it hit me really hard, maybe you get 3 nuggets and maybe I get 6, and maybe it's like we all know one of the things that, and we're probably not going to discuss this, so I'll just park it here. That one of the things that's really important when you think about equity is historical differences in pay for people of color and for women that are in the exact same roles. Just for those who don't know, literally last week on December 8th was Latina Equal Pay Day. Yes. That means that it takes, and that was at the end, so essentially it takes 24 months to make what one white man makes in 1 year. Yeah. Black Women's Equal Pay Day was, I think, September 21st this year, right? Mm-hmm. And so and everyone has that data. All y'all's companies have it, and all our all's companies have it. Mm-hmm. But that's one. There is so much legacy. So and that's, I don't know if that's good or bad, but I will say the younger generation is pushing for things like pay transparency, and these equity issues are big, and they're scary. Like from the top, how do you crack that open? What do you do about it? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one thing I'm just thinking about this, and I'm hearing the discussion between you all, but. Has there been a moment when any of you have gone to leadership, have gone to board members, and have voiced your concerns when it comes to DEI, and you've seen something move, and you've seen some positive change?
I mean, not at the board level, but one of my roles I had was the head of employee relations for Disneyland, and we had to change our look. The Disney look was a very interesting way of dressing as employees, and it wasn't always friendly and inclusive of people's beliefs and cultures. And one of the gifts I guess I provided to Disney before I left was kind of breaking down the Disney look so that Disney cast members could wear beards. That there was it was a very inclusive, homogenous way of doing it. And based on a really interesting challenge that we were given, we looked at it and said it's time for the look to go, or the look to evolve. So that was a win. And I think if any of you have been to Disney theme parks in your life, you remember what cast members used to look like. And if you go to Disneyland now, you'll see a lot more inclusive tattoos. You'll see beards. You'll see longer hair, different color hair, and things like that. So, when I think back at my career, that was the biggest win, I guess I could say, is that the organization was like, you're right, it's time for us to change. And that was a very tough change. That was like a Walt Disney thing himself, right? So to change that was very difficult, but everyone understood.
I would say that, we went directly to our leadership and said that in order for us to design representative toys, why don't we leverage our ERGs? If we're making a black doll with black hair, might as well should talk to some black folks.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Hey, we right here, right? And if we're gonna make a Latina doll, we better talk to some Latino people. Yep. It's pretty simple. Sometimes I think people make things overly complex. It's like if you're gonna make something, talk to people who right around you. Your best critics are in your employees right now. So they'll tell you, nah. And you don't have to go out and pay any market research. Yes. You walk down over there, show her that doll, and look at her face.
They don't talk like that.
Yeah, right? So I think, a lot of times we actually, there's an elegance in being simple, but it takes a lot of effort to look effortless. And so we got to keep putting that in there. But it also takes people going up and saying that and challenging, because all we're trying to do is actually improve the business and improve the culture, because the minute that somebody asks you, oh, we're designing this, can you take a look at it? Somebody in procurement, say, will you take a look at this doll? They say, now I'm involved in making a toy. Mm-hmm. Oh, what does that make me want to do? I want to come back in. I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here. They look to me, and this ain't even my job.
That's very cool.
That's crucial. Now I'm part of the team.
No, that's so true. I think for me, as someone who's had to navigate the C-suite as a woman, a queer woman of color, I think that when you look at having to convince people, I'd never join a company who I didn't think made a way of belonging for a person like me. So the answer to that question is no, I would never join a company if the board of directors of the C-suite doesn't buy into inclusion. I'm not the right place for me. So no, I've never really been in that kind of situation. Yep. But what I would say is navigating these kind of things means that you have to approach it the same way you approach any other business issue. And I think that that's where we lose ourselves sometimes in inclusion as a business principle, or diversity as a business principle. I think we lose the fact that we are still running businesses. We are still for-profit entities. Mm-hmm. And you have to keep aligning yourselves to the things that they're there for. They're there to drive profit to their stakeholders. And that matters.
Yep. Yeah, it does.
And increasingly, as customers and really the world are holding companies accountable for their DEI practices, for investing in, for supplier diversity, this becomes a question where consumers want to invest in brands that are doing good in a way that really didn't exist the same way prior to 2020, prior to the murder of George Floyd. It was really like sort of activist consumers who were like, I only want to spend with companies that, don't do animal testing, or that, have whatever their values were. But post 2020, everybody started to care. All of you and all of the people you work with, darn near all of them, started to care about who you're spending your dollar with. Mm-hmm. Who you're giving in our industry, who we're giving our eyes to, right? Our eyeballs, our time. And so when that happened, DE&I changed, because it went from sort of this thing on the side that was in like kind of ESG or like kind of supplier diversity. Mm-hmm. It moved to everywhere throughout the organization. And in fact, it's one of the best things that happened to all of our work, because all of us, whatever our identity is, we're given in many ways sort of this permission to advocate for, to ask for inclusion, to demand that we're being seen in the way that we want to be seen. And it made companies accountable for doing that to us. Yep. And then our dollars as consumers to other brands, looked at in a different way. So I know it's been hard, and I know we're facing some challenges, those practitioners of DE&I, with everything that's changing now with the economy. But I do think We are on this, we are still going up, and I don't think we're going to see this bell curve. This is going to continue to be important to the industry and our individual businesses, our people and consumers.
And I would say that, DEI was thought of as a vertical, right? And it's not a vertical, it's a lens through which you should look at everything part of your business through. And so that way then it becomes, it's implicit upon everybody to be responsible for it. Mm-hmm. The way that you look across your role to the other roles that are adjacent to you, to the roles that are not even touching you. But if we all keep that in that eye line, that's how the business improves, and that's how your internal culture continues to improve. And that's when you get that brand loyalty, because people know, oh, I work for them, I spend my money with them because I know somebody who works there and they love it. It's just like these, we still live in a word of mouth world still. That we're increasingly connected, but when somebody says like, hey, I like working there, like, oh, for real? Yeah,
that's a point that I think is important to make. If you are out there and on your D&I and belonging and justice and equality and equity journey, start with how you treat each other and what you're saying to each other and what tools that you have internally before going and trying to express it externally. And I think starting with your people, doing the work, it's harder and maybe more complex to lead in this world today. It should be. That's why leaders get paid more. That's why they're the ones on the website, right? It should be hard.
Right. Deborah, I want to ask you this. This is kind of piggybacking off of...
I seem like I got some animosity today.
Hey, no. You bring in the proper energy.
Let it out.
We're sorry we're derailing all your questions. It's just...
This is great.
We got sparks flying up here.
This is great. I want to bring Deborah into the fold, into this. Like Stacie said, there was a shift when it came to George Floyd, and you saw how companies started to integrate more people from different backgrounds and more people of color and so forth. Where do you see this going moving forward? Just I guess from Workday and from your perspective.
I think it's about not being afraid to have these conversations, which might sound really basic, but a lot of organizations aren't having these conversations, right? We have within our listening platform a question set that's all around diversity, sense of inclusion, non-discrimination. Do I feel fairly treated? Do I feel fairly rewarded? Tapping into as many different elements as we can, so we're constantly hearing from our workforces, where are we at? Where do we want to be? What's the gap? How are we going to fill it? So I don't think it's a one size fits all in terms of where are we heading. I think organizations are already, some are much further ahead than others, some are much more mature in their thinking than others. I think the important thing is not being afraid to open up these conversations with our people rather than keeping it at the top level of an organization as well. And not every business is there, as I say. Workday, we have a very mature culture. We are having these conversations. Every week I have an opportunity to say something about how I feel about my experience at work, how included do I feel, my sense of belonging, and we're tracking that every single week. So we know what's affecting it, what's making things change, and we can also then make that more granular and look at that by different groups, for example. So it's about keeping abreast of it from that point of view. And as someone made the point earlier about this doesn't need to be complicated, right? I think we need to start with listening to our people, hearing what their lived experiences are every single day, and then that will inform what do we do next. And that is going to be different for every business, hands down.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about artificial intelligence. Stacie.
I don't know that I was thinking about, go ahead, I'll let you ask your question. And then I'll give you my segue.
Right.
So y'all listen to this question because I'm going to
bat
it to you.
Okay. This is funny.
She's not going to answer this
question. Let me ask you anyway. Artificial intelligence is being used for talent acquisition, skills evaluation, and many other things. But it's notoriously can have a bias written into what would defeat inclusion. How are you dealing with that?
So my intention really actually is to throw it to OJ and Deborah because I think they're more in this space, especially when it comes to listening. What I will tell you is when it comes to AI, we've done a lot of experimentation, and in the end, for the work we are doing today, the work I'm doing today and my team is doing in our DE&I function, it hasn't shown to be the best practice for us today. So now what I'm going to say is I know we are moving that direction. I know we are going to have to machine learn the hell out of everything. Like, I know it's going that way. Today, it's not giving us what we need, and so I don't know if there is perhaps more time that we need to be able to, use that data and evaluate if it's really giving us the sentiment that we're trying to get out of, our people, or in this case, in the work that I'm doing, if we're looking at like on-screen talent or representation, we've really needed to use people. Do I think it will get to where we need it to be one day? Of course, and I think we all know that. We can't be deniers that ML and AI are going to do that. But I really think when we're thinking about employee acquisition, the best person to talk about that would be OJ and perhaps Deborah.
Ooh, absolutely.
So I think AI is still dangerous. I think it's still very much in its infancy as it relates to being inclusive, and it's still practicing. That doesn't mean it's bad. That's what happens with technology. I think it's very much evolving. I think using AI to drive to quantitative outcomes is awesome for D&I. I think using AI today to look qualitatively at things is still very scary for me. I don't know about y'all Workday because you got a bigger budget than me, but looking at qualitative data with AI is still very scary to me. But I think quantitative outcomes, like we're using AI to look at sentiment and comparing that to attrition, like to me, boom, use as much AI to do that as you want to. But when it comes to about my feelings and what decisions that I'm going to make, I think it is not rooted enough in diverse sort of inputs to really give us the right qualitative outputs.
Real quick, Deborah, we only have a few seconds left.
I would just say,
like
I'm glad we have that awareness of those biases, right? So we can do this carefully. Yeah.
Absolutely.
1 second left.
That was very brief. Thank you.
Everyone, that's our panel discussion. Thank you for coming. Thank you for this esteemed panel. I learned so much now. It was great. It was absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.